The first radio broadcast of a sporting event took place in April of 1921. It was a boxing match in Pittsburgh with live coverage on radio station KDKA. Over a century later, we are still listening to sports on the radio. My guest on this episode is Mike Eaby, the coordinating producer for Westwood One Sports, one of the largest sports radio networks in the country. He talks about his entry into the business, the magnitude of the Westwood One Sports schedule, the mechanics of broadcasting on radio versus TV, and how our industry is evolving. I'm putting on the headsets with Mike Eaby on this episode of Media Credentials. My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. This episode is one that requires a little upfront exposition. Westwood One is a radio network that syndicates music, talk, and sports programming nationwide. With over 9,000 affiliated radio stations, Westwood One is the largest audio network in the country. On the sports side, their NFL programming, which includes the regular season, the playoffs, and the Super Bowl, reached 56 million people last year, and that's just the NFL. They also produce college basketball, including March Madness games for both men and women, plus college football, plus other NCAA championships, plus golf. As you'll hear, Mike and I had a hard time counting how many events they produce each year. Whatever that number turns out to be, every event requires a technical setup. The microphones, the cabling, the audio boards, the stat monitors, and then logistics, travel, hotels. As the coordinating producer, Mike has a hand in just about all of that. I've had the pleasure of working with Westwood One for over a decade, primarily as a reporter at the Masters and more recently as a post-game host for the PGA Championship, which is when this conversation was recorded. As I've mentioned in other episodes, I was a radio guy first, starting in college. I have a passion for it, and as you'll hear, Mike does too. Mike, thanks a lot for coming on. I think the first question is, how big is Westwood One Sports? I mean, I think of the NFL, I think of golf, I think of the NCAA, but the list of entities that Westwood One is partnered with on the sports side is pretty lengthy. Can you give me the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're anchored by the NFL and the March Madness stuff, but, we have other deals in which we do NCAA football. So we do a college football game every week. We do, as part of our NCAA partnership, which, the reason we got into it initially was because of March Madness and the NCAA tournament. But as we expand on that, we do the lacrosse championships. We do the FCS championship. We do men's and women's college World Series in the summer. So it kind of gives us some programming in off months when we don't have the NFL or don't have college basketball. And it also helps with our relationship with the NCAA to do those and spotlight those other events that they have. And then, we dip into golf. We, as you know, obviously working with me with the Masters, we show up at Augusta every year. I am currently, as we're talking, at the PGA Championship in Rochester, New York. So we do some golf. And things along the way have kind of come and gone through the years. We did the Stanley Cup playoffs for a little while. Then we didn't. And then we did for a couple of years. And now we don't again. I would say whenever the major rights are up in a lot of the major sports, conversations are had, whether they're internally or externally, for just about everything that's on the radio.
On the question of rights deals, they do often change hands. They do come up for renewal. And you mentioned that you had hockey and then you didn't. And, we were at the Masters for a number of years and then we weren't. Does that make you sort of fear for your job security at times? Are those nervy times in the office for you when those rights deals are up?
For sure. But I guess the anxiety more comes with the major events, right? So the NFL is the big one. Whenever that's up, whenever those negotiations are happening, from a personal and professional standpoint, yes, you get nervous. You're like, okay, things are going to change if this doesn't happen. Same with the NCAA tournament. And we went through both of those recently in the last couple of years where we weren't sure. You fear for your job, you fear for your family, all those things, but you also kind of take a step back at times and you're like, okay, if we're anchored by the NFL, we're anchored by March Madness, they love what we do, the NFL loves what we do, then it does alleviate some of those fears. While you get a little nervous, I've never really been like, oh my gosh, I might lose my job if this doesn't happen. Some of the, and I hate to say smaller ones, but like you mentioned the Masters there, right? We still have a relationship with Augusta National. We still show up and do some programming from there, but it's not the full-blown play-by-play that we used to do. I don't really fear for my job when it's just a week-long event. Or prior to that, we used to do the Olympics forever. And, I started off my career going to every Olympics from 2000 in Sydney to 2018 in Korea. And those are month-long events. And while from a personal standpoint, they sucked. I miss the last one we did was 2018 in Korea, and I missed the Olympics big time. It was one of my favorite events every year. But I knew that wasn't enough to cause me to necessarily lose my job or for Westwood One as a company to really lose a ton of sleep over. Even though the Olympics, I was the lead coordinating producer for, and the Masters, I was the lead coordinating producer and still am for the limited amount of coverage that we do now. So yeah, you always fear for it, and things always change hands. But look, at the end of the day, we've done 37 Super Bowls in a row for the NFL as the network radio home of the Super Bowl / NFL playoff / primetime package, right? March Madness predates. And I started in 1997 weekends, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. So I've been around with Westwood One for 26 years. And we had a partnership with the NCAA tournament and the March Madness and the NCAA since the beginning. We took over the full-fledged rights, though, probably a few years after I started in the early 2000s. I think it was 2001, maybe 2000, from an entity called Host Communications prior to that. So I feel good in that, hey, we've had these for a long time. And if they like what you do, radio is not one of those entities where we're talking about billions of dollars in rights fees, right? That really change things much, right? We're talking about a little bit of money. And I know in the past, like Augusta National, they just loved our coverage. And that's kind of why we stuck on for years. I know for years we were outbid by other places, but they kept coming back to us because they loved what we did. And then eventually things change, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it's those main sports that really generate the huge amount of revenue that make you fear for your job.
When you're on site at these events, the Olympics, when you had the Olympics, NFL, et cetera, what is your day-to-day schedule? What do you do when you're at the event?
So, it depends on the event, but obviously, to kind of dumb it down a little bit, when we had the Olympics, I was in charge of a group of, we usually had 20 to 25 people, a crew, whether it was producers, whether it was on-air talent, or engineers at the Olympics. And I kind of brought it all together. Now, us being radio and not having the 3,000 people that NBC television takes to the Olympics, you kind of do different things. So if there's a personnel issue, that's obviously me. If there were I acted like as the liaison between us and the Olympic folks or us and NBC, and you kind of massage those relationships. And then it being, like I said, being radio and not TV, I also produced a nightly talk show that we did, or a nightly kind of recap show with the play-by-play and things like that. And I oversaw the play-by-play. So the Olympics were long days. I mean, I'm talking, I would go there for a month, wherever it was. I would be in our studios 16, 17 hours a day. And then I would go back to wherever I was staying for a few hours, get some sleep, get a shower, and then rinse and repeat and do it all over again. some of the other events, like if I produce an NFL game every week during the season, I show up the day before the game. I'm in charge of getting all the logistics ready prior to getting there. Once we get there, my main focus is making sure we're all set up with our engineer, get us on the air, and then just producing the event, commercials, the action, things like that. I would say the hardest event on the radio side of things that I ever produced was the golf events and the Masters, because that's when you're more, from a radio standpoint, kind of looking at it as if it's a TV broadcast. For 6 hours, while we did our live play-by-play coverage, I was completely in charge of when we went to commercials, which, by the way, if you do an NFL event, an NBA, college basketball, those are set for you. You go to commercial when television goes to commercial. Golf, you have to decide when to go to commercial. You have to decide when you're going out to 16 to call a putt. You have to decide when you're going out to 8 to call the tee shot. You have to decide when you're going to bring in a leaderboard update and have the studio take over for 2 minutes, whatever it is. You have to decide when you're going to sneak in those Whit Watson interviews between action and hear from the golfers themselves. And so there was a lot going on. And so I always said, and some people always kind of question me, like, what are you talking about? I always said the Masters was the most difficult thing that I actually produced in my yearly calendar, because you just had to make so many decisions about what to air and also decisions on what not to air. And it's totally different flow, if you will, and you can tell that by watching a golf event versus watching an NFL game. It's just a totally different flow on how things happen.
What drew you to Westwood One in the first place all those years ago? How'd you get started?
So kind of funny. So I grew up playing sports, as I'm sure we all did. And that's all I did from, time I woke up until the day ended, other than days I had school, was I did sports. And just to kind of give you context, I was born in 1975. So I grew up in the 80s, basically. And went to high school in the early 90s. And I was just into sports. I grew up playing ice hockey. I grew up playing basketball on teams, or ice hockey and baseball on teams. But I grew up playing a lot of basketball on the side with courts, tennis, golf, you name it. I did it. And so it's kind of all I knew. But the other thing is, I for some reason, when I was in high school and growing up, and I was into maps, right? So I just studied maps, which I know sounds bizarre today, especially. But so when I got to high school and I started getting closer to college, like, what do you want to do when you get to college? I actually was going to go to college for cartography.
I didn't even know that was a major. Is that still a thing, cartography?
I have no idea if it is now as we sit here in 2023. I have no idea.
Wow.
But that's what I was going to go to college for. So I would say around my junior year in high school, I started reaching out to, what they're called, the United States Cartography Association, whatever. I do remember writing a letter to some place in Bethesda, Maryland, which is near where I live now, actually. And that's what I was going to go to school for. So then the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, that was the thought process. And I was playing baseball. I got injured, was unable to play baseball that summer for a little bit. And my high school actually hosted a baseball tournament that summer, and I was unable to play in it. And I have no idea how this actually happened, but I signed up to be the PA announcer at the baseball field. And I did that all weekend. And I started thinking to myself, like, this is a way to be around the sport. This is kind of cool. Like, if I'm not playing, this is kind of cool. So then I started looking into it. And before I knew it, by the time I graduated high school, I had a new major, and it was communication journalism. And I wanted to get into broadcasting. I don't know how to phrase this, but I wasn't pushed a lot. I didn't have a lot of resources available, I guess. So I went to a Division II school in Pennsylvania, which is where I lived and grew up. I grew up in Lancaster, PA. And I went to a place called Shippensburg University, which is a D2 school. It's part of the state system. It doesn't cost a lot to go there. But one benefit of going there was they had a radio station, they had a TV station, but they didn't have a lot of people that were into it, right? If you go to Newhouse and you're a Syracuse kid, you're battling it out. I mean, you're fighting for airtime. You're fighting just to be working at the radio station.
Absolutely. Right.
It was not that way at Shippensburg. I was able to go there, get on the air all the time. I did play-by-play for baseball, basketball, and football for them. I created the first sports talk show they had at that radio station when I became sports director. It was a chance to actually really get into everything that I wanted to do. And so, of course, that further tickled the senses on my part. We're like, okay, this is what I want to do. So then my goal in college became, okay, I want my paycheck. I want to earn a living working in sports. And I just thought it would be the coolest thing in the world. I mean, you're a 20-year-old kid. I graduated college and I was working, making minimum wage at a radio station in Pennsylvania. And I had a girlfriend at the time who lived down in the Washington, D.C. area. And her family actually invited me to move down there to see if I wanted to look for jobs down there. And I did that summer after I graduated in 97. And I sent my resume out to, back then, this is when you kind of printed it and mailed it. And I mailed it to a bunch of different places. And back then, Westwood One had a major studio in the D.C. area in Crystal City, Virginia. And it was part of the old Mutual Broadcasting System, right? And this studio was actually where Larry King got his start before he had a CNN TV show, was in this studio in Crystal City, Virginia. Well, they had a sports studio there as well. And I got hooked up with them in 1997. Those summer, I started working weekends. I worked whatever I could. They asked me to work. I worked it. I had to have a side job because it wasn't full time. But whenever, wherever I worked, holidays. I mean, I had a full-time job during the week to pay my bills. I was working at Westwood One on the weekends. And then including Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and all that, I worked holidays. And for 6 or 7 months, I literally did not have a day off of work. And that's just kind of what I had to do to keep this, I guess, dream alive of the sports dream of staying in sports. And, I went to school thinking I wanted to be on air. And I realized in college that I wasn't good enough. I didn't have the voice. I just was not that good at on air. I got to Westwood One. And they allowed me, a national radio company, to do a lot of things from a producer standpoint that was awesome, which is why I got into the business. I mean, my first ever NFL game I attended was when I was 24 years old, and I produced my first NFL game for Westwood One in Lambeau Field. So you're 23, 24 years old, and you're traveling around to NFL stadiums.
So you got paid to go to your first NFL game, and you were producing it.
Correct. To this day, I hate to, it sounds, I don't know how this sounds, pretentious or whatever. How many years later, 25 years, 24 years later, I've probably been to 500 NFL games, 400 to 500 NFL games, and I've still never paid to go to a game.
It's the life we live. I mean, people, it sounds funny, but I'm trying to recall the last time I bought a ticket to go see a golf tournament. Yep. And I can't. And that just, it's just the life you chose. And so you're a lifer. You've been in one place your entire professional career post-college.
Yeah, I in those couple of years where I was making ends meet before I became full-time with Westwood One, I worked at a local radio station in Washington, D.C., 106.7 WJFK, for a talk show called The Old Don and Mike Show. And they were kind of shock jocks, kind of very popular back in the day. I worked on that show. And then the local sports talk show, which was WTEM Sports Talk 980 in D.C., I worked as a board op there on the weekends and holidays and, just trying to make my way through the business. But I always worked. I mean, I started working weekends part-time at Westwood One, I think 2 months after I graduated college in 97. And I've been there ever since. So that is it'll be 26 years this summer. Now that I do the quick math in my head. It's wild.
Now, you say that being an athlete and a sports fan is what drew you into this career, but you could have gone into sports marketing. You could have gone and worked for a franchise in ticket sales or in sponsorship sales. There's a lot of different facets of, quote, sports. So what is it about the media aspect? What was it that caught you in terms of In your case, radio. Did you ever have a dalliance with television? What was it about media that was attractive?
It may have just been, honestly, it may have been ignorance. I don't know, because I didn't have a lot of guidance. I don't have any family members that are in the business. My sister and I were probably the only ones in our family, the first ones in our family that had gone to college even. I didn't have a lot of resources. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to call. Young broadcasters nowadays reach out to me. They reach out to everybody in the business when they're in high school even. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't try to do any of that. I just didn't know, right? I kind of got the job at Westwood One by a little bit of work or a little bit of luck and then a lot of hard work. So I think, to answer your question, when I got into the media thing, that was the first thing that I was attracted to, because not only did I play a lot of sports, I watched a lot of sports growing up. My idol growing up, or once I started thinking that media may be a thing for me, my idol became Harry Callis, the old play-by-play announcer for the Philadelphia Phillies. Just iconic. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He also did, by the way, NFL games for Westwood One, and I got to work with him, which was awesome. Nicest guy in the world. And I grew up watching a lot of Phillies broadcasts and a lot of Phillies games and watching this guy every night on my television. And then I got to work with him, and then I'd be, out after the game with him, having a drink. That is pretty cool. And
I'm going to make you pause for a second.
Yeah.
This is further proof that everybody in broadcasting knows everybody, or is at least one generation away from everybody. I worked with Todd Callis on Tampa Bay Rays broadcasts before he got the play-by-play job with the Houston Astros. So just wanted to throw that in there. You worked with his dad. I worked with Todd. So anyway.
Well, when you do talk to Todd, you tell him
I will.
Harry was he knows this and probably heard it a million times, but Harry was just honestly the best. He is such a good guy, and he treated me very well, and he was so calm and collected.
Give me a ballpark of how many events per year Westwood One now produces.
I haven't done the math. I'll start with the NFL. I haven't done the math on this year's schedule because, as you know, it has become a lot more robust with the Black Friday games, the Monday night doubleheader games that have just all been announced recently. I don't know what this year's number is. It's going to be around 85 games that we do, NFL games, because we do the entire primetime package, which is Sunday night football, Monday night football, Thursday night football, all the international games, the 5 Sunday morning games. There's going to be 3 from London, 2 from Germany this year.
And you're not going to all of those games, are you? Or do you?
Me personally?
You personally. The London games and the Germany games and the Black Friday games. I mean, how many of those would you go to?
So I do one NFL game every week.
Okay.
From an international standpoint, we haven't figured everything out yet, but I do love the international stuff, and a lot of that goes back to my Olympic days. I will probably do 2 of the London games, is my guess.
Okay.
And I will probably do them back to back, and just, because it's actually just as cheap to stay there in a hotel than would be to fly back and forth. So I will probably do back to back London, and you use those opportunities when you're gone all the time to potentially bring the family along sometimes, right? My wife, her favorite city in the world is London. So I'm sure she'll try to figure out a way for her and my son, who's 12 now, to go to those things. And, that's part of why we love this business and why we do it is to pick and choose opportunities like that to bring the family members. But so that's what we do. We do all the way through the Super Bowl. We do the NFL playoffs and then the Super Bowl every year. We do a college football game every Saturday. We will do a college basketball game or 2 every week leading into March. And then we do championship week, in which we will do 25 championship week games. Then we would do the NCAA tournament, men's, every game of the men's tournament. We do every game of the women's tournament, starting with the Sweet 16. We will do the NIT in the middle of that. We will do the Frozen Four. We will do the Masters in the beginning of April, PGA in May. We do a few ancillary NFL programming shows around some of that. The NFL Draft, obviously, being at the end of April. We did a schedule release show last week for the NFL. Then we will do, sometimes we do short form updates where our stations, our local sports talk radio stations, can insert just a minute update, right? So here at the PGA this week, we're partnering with Sirius XM Radio to do the full play-by-play coverage, but our stations that are unable to take that can also take these short-form reports. And so we're doing those from the media center. We will also do those for the U.S. Open, the British Open, and a few other events throughout the year to get those involved. We will do the Men's and Women's College World Series next month as part of the NCAA Radio Network. And then we'll start our NFL season with the Hall of Fame game and some of the Hall of Fame ceremonies, induction stuff in early August. I would say that is, I hope I'm not missing anything, but that's what our calendar looks like.
So we're in the high hundreds, if not thousands, of events per year. Am I close?
It's in the hundreds. It's in
Okay.
the hundreds. So, you're talking, March Madness was at 67 games for the men's side. Another, just trying to do the quick math in the head. So about 150 college basketball games, 17 college football games, 85 NFL games, and then all those other stuff in between that I also mentioned. So, yeah, it's in the hundreds for sure.
High hundreds. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and on a national scale, you've got ESPN Radio is bidding for the rights to certain sports, and you've got CBS Sports Radio. Learfield, for those who don't know, does a lot of college sports on radio, mostly football and basketball, and they market it and sell it as well. When Westwood One goes in and makes its pitch to a league or a governing body, how do you try to differentiate yourself? What is the Westwood One advantage when you make your sales pitch to the PGA of America or Augusta National or the NFL?
Yeah, a lot of it's legacy. We have a lot of stations that have been loyal through the years that are going to air this coverage. So if you want your league or your conference or your team to air somewhere for listeners out there, you can come to us, and it's going to be everywhere. Culminating with our Super Bowl broadcast, our NFL broadcasts are over the air, and I don't know what the crazy number is anymore. Like 93% of America can pick it up on the radio if you have a radio, and then obviously online, 100% of America can pick it up. That's one aspect, is we just have the relationships with a lot of the radio stations throughout the country, and boom, we can get your conference or your league or whatever on the air. And then the other value is in just our production. I do think we have a very strong reputation for putting on a good product. If you're listening to, let's just say the NFL, we have, in a lot of cases, better announcers than what television has. Our Monday Night Football broadcast is Kevin Harlan and Kurt Warner. That is awesome. You know how many people we get on Twitter or whatever say, hey, we mute TV and we pull you guys up and try to sync up the audio and watch it, but listen to you guys as well, because we've got two of the best in the business, right? And that's kind of across the board. And obviously it falls back to my boss, who's Howie Deneroff. He's the executive producer of Westwood One. He's been in the business for longer than I have. He's been at Westwood One for longer than I have. He's one of those Syracuse Mafia people that I spoke about earlier. And he knows a lot of people, and he's also has just the best ear in the business. Like we've all gotten decent at listening and identifying talent and knowing what's good and what's bad, but there's no one better than he is. And so the leagues and the conferences and the teams, they love that, and they hear it. You can hear I think you can hear the difference. It just sounds big time if it's a Westwood One broadcast, in my opinion. And I think that does give us a leg up. And we've heard from a few other entities as these rights fees become available. And, at times, if they're not necessarily thrilled with the dollar amount that we've maybe negotiated or trying to negotiate, what we've heard sometimes in return is, yes, but we do love your product, so we're going to come back to you guys. And I think that's a big part of it. It's just our production value. And I'm sure there's other people in the industry that kind of disagree. And, it's this very subjective field, but man, Howie has a great ear, and it really trickles down to our product. I think our product is second to none.
I think I would agree with you, and not because I work on those broadcasts, but rather because I listen to a lot of radio coming from other entities, and this is more on the talk side, which is not really your purview. You're more strictly events, but you do hear a lot of people who get a lot of run on the air who just aren't very good. And I wonder, is that because we are so starved for content? Has there been a drift perhaps away from elite production value and more just towards get it on the air because people crave the content?
I think that's part of it. Part of it is society now. Society's not in tune. They're distracted. Okay. So if I'm 20 years ago, you were listening to a game, it may have been the only thing you were doing. You may have been sitting on your front porch with a beer listening to a game. Now you're checking out your phone, you're checking out the scores from other places. Like, you're doing other things. And I think people can't be as focused on what they're actually hearing nowadays like they used to be. And I think money has become a factor. It didn't used to be. There used to be a lot more money in the media business, in the production budgets for all these entities. I'm just talking about across the board. There was a sense of just make the product sound good. We will make the money on the sales side up, whatever it is. Go out and get the best talent. Go out and if you show up at an event and you need to have 10 different positions at an event to make it sound really good, do it. And now I think that maybe there's a sense of, or like on the sports talk side, again, you mentioned that I don't really delve into that spectrum too much, but I'm sure if somebody did some sort of audit, sports talk radio stations 20 years ago did a lot more remotes. They were out at a lot of the different events. And maybe that's just not the case anymore because the budget is not there to send those hosts on location as much.
When satellite radio became a thing, there was some concern that it would damage the market, the business for terrestrial radio, the standard over-the-air stations. And you've talked about how many of those over-the-air stations Westwood One has arrangements with, how many affiliates Westwood One has. What has satellite radio and streaming, which is becoming more and more prevalent, has that changed any aspect of your business or of your job, or do you just do it the same way you've always done it, and what happens down the line is not really your concern?
Yeah, I think it hasn't changed how we produce events necessarily. We still want to put the best product out there that we possibly can. We want to hire the same amount of people. We want this or that. I do think it has helped us in a recognizable, I guess, angle from like people say, "Oh, Westwood One." Yes, I listen to your Monday night broadcast every week on Sirius XM, right? And so the listener has so many different ways of actually hearing us, and a lot of it is the people that travel a lot. The truck drivers and things like that. We hear from those guys that, whereas before Sirius and before streaming, they would be traveling around and like, oh gosh, I left the Richmond area. Now where am I going to find Westwood One? Now where am I going to listen to this NFL game?
Right, you're flipping the dial trying to find the next local affiliate, right?
And so I'll hop in an Uber nowadays and hey, what are you here for? Why are you in Vegas? Oh, I'm here for the NCAA tournament. Oh, why are you here? Oh, I'm here to work. Okay, Westwood One. Oh yeah, I listen to you guys all the time. A lot of it is now, especially with the younger generation, is they're listening to us online. It's like, oh yes, I'm on your website, I'm on your app, I'm or Sirius. They've really. I do think that those two things, it has made us more well known. I think in a way because it's just easier to listen. It just makes things easier to listen to us. Now, have we changed I don't think we've really changed what we've done from a production standpoint and how we do it. No, but it makes it easier. It makes, people can listen to us on our regular affiliates and then online or on Sirius, and boom, it's just out there. And I think it's been a benefit to all.
I think you're right in that there's never been more ways to listen to a game, whatever that means, than there is right now. If you had a crystal ball, given your 26 plus years of experience, what do you think is coming? What's a trend that we might see in the months and years to come in terms of how we listen to sports content?
I think that the momentum is there for things to keep rolling. you sometimes hear about radios going away or people aren't listening as much, the younger generation. I think I'm actually positive. I think there's a home for all this stuff. I think people now, to my earlier point, maybe they're not listening as intently as they once were. I still think people are multitasking in a way in which they can listen to sports. And if they're still in the sports and they want to hear what's going on and they can't just be sitting there watching it on their phone or on TV or whatever, I think that there's space for all these people to be listening and multitasking while they're listening. So I'm excited. And, I think gambling's a part of that. I think there's probably people gambling more now than ever on sports. And so while they can stop what they're doing and they can check the score at any time they want, I still think there's something cool. Maybe cool is a bad way to put radio, right? Maybe that's a wrong word to use, but there's something fun, I still think, about listening to a game for the average listener. And we try to present it in a edge of your seat kind of way. I mean, if you're listening to Kevin Harlan on your drive around the Super Bowl and you have money on the game, or you're just listening as a fan, he's somebody who's going to get you on the edge of your seat that you just can't pick up anywhere else.
The future of national sports radio, and this is more on the talk programming side than the event side. So I understand that you may not be able to speak to this as well as you'd like. But as we look at what's happening with ESPN, already one round of layoffs, there are more layoffs coming, and it's going to be bad from what everyone has been reporting. And one of the items on the chopping block, and I've been reading this in the last couple of weeks, has been ESPN Radio itself, either doing away with it entirely or drastically reducing the footprint of ESPN Radio. And one of the arguments is local coverage versus national coverage when ESPN Radio is the backdrop service, that people in Orlando, Florida are not going to listen to you talk about the New York Jets all day long. They don't care. People in Tampa don't care about the Red Sox. To me, I hate that idea. If in fact that is possible, I'm a radio guy at heart. I started in radio, and I don't want to see anybody go down like that. But are you concerned about that just from a general business standpoint of radio being sort of targeted as the thing that we could get rid of first?
Yeah, look, it's concerning, right? It's definitely concerning. I feel like there is space for something. I feel like things change over time, and everybody just needs to change with it, for good, better or for worse. And that's across the board for every industry, but the media industry too. Things just change. Like, I hate the layoffs that are happening. I hate it when it happens to colleagues and friends. Sometimes it's just a change into what's next. And then the industry itself, not necessarily Mike Eaby, but the industry itself needs to find what's next. And where does that go to? If there's a listenership for it, if there's a market for it, it'll get figured out. Some people like different things. You like the local, if you're driving around Orlando, you like to hear Magic talk, not New York Jets talk. And I get that. The sales dollars need to be there. And if the listeners are there, the sales dollars will follow. And that's what you need to prevent all of this from happening. I don't like, and again, I'm not ESPN, never worked there. I don't like to hear things like that's first or next on the chopping block is the radio portion of that. Because I still feel like there's a market for that and for what they do from a national perspective. While Whit Watson may not want to drive around and listen to the Magic, there's probably a lot of transplants in Orlando that don't care about the Magic
right.
and want to listen about the New York Jets.
Right.
So they're going to tune out what Whit Watson is listening to. And so I feel like there is a market for all of it. I mean, look at how many podcasts are out there now. I mean, you have so many choices, but they all figure out a way to kind of fit in. And for listeners and for the sales part of this, it's always a concern. I just feel like if the market's there and if you're adapting to the market and what people want, something will survive. It may not look like what it used to, but survival is there.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. It should be noted that Westwood One Sports not only streams their events for free on their website, but also has an app that allows you to listen on your device. And of course, there's the hundreds of local radio stations nationwide that carry Westwood One Sports. As Mike said, so many choices. Our last topic was of particular interest. As Mike indicated, the reports of radio's demise have been greatly exaggerated. A Nielsen study from June of 2022 said that radio reaches 93% of the overall U.S. population each week. That's more than live television and a higher usage rate than smartphones. We also talked about podcasts. According to the hosting site Buzzsprout, 75% of the U.S. population over the age of 12 have listened to online audio in the last month, and 90 million Americans are weekly podcast listeners. So many choices. So thanks for choosing this one. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.